It goes without saying that version 4.6 was incredibly good, both with the world quests about Remuria and with Arlecchino's story quest. Since these two topics are really complicated, I decided to split them in two separate videos, with today's one being all about Arlecchino. As always, this is a theory video. I use information available in the game, but my theories and conclusions are not to be considered the official lore of the game, unless I got something right and it's confirmed in a later update of the game itself. Today I won't focus too much on the story quest itself, apart from a very short recap. This video will mainly focus on Arlecchino's curse and origins, and considering the length of this video you may realize that there's a lot to talk about. So summon your bloodfire chairs, get comfortable, and let's get this video started. Because of a spirit roaming the House of the Hearth, the children of the orphanage had been temporarily relocated to Poisson. We learned that some of them are displeased with their lives because they didn't ask to become Fatui operatives and have been trash-talking Arlecchino behind their back. We then found out that the spirit was the afterimage of Khaenri'ah, Crusabina's biological daughter and Peruer's childhood friend. Freminet had been hiding her from Arlecchino, and Lini and Lynette ended up helping him. Arlecchino though knew everything that was happening but decided not to act. She allowed us to trick her to buy the children time, and she even agreed to tell us her story in exchange of siding with the House of the Hearth when the right time came. She brought us to the place where she defeated both Khaenri'ah and Crusabina, and at dusk she had the children bring the traitors there as well. Although Crusabina is not the director anymore, one rule still stands. Whoever betrays the knave or the house must die, because the children know too many secrets to be allowed to leave the institute. Since disputes can also be resolved through a battle, Arlecchino challenged Freminet, Lini and Lynette to test their determination, so the traveler sided with the house just like Arlecchino expected him to. Of course, there was no way anyone could defeat her, even the traveler wasn't strong enough, but since it was all planned, Arlecchino stopped right before unleashing her true powers. Because Arlecchino won, the traitors had to be executed, but because the children proved their loyalty to the family, which is more important than their loyalty to her specifically, she quote-unquote decided to change the execution method. Those who wanted to leave would be administered the bottle flames extracted from her body thanks to Dottore's help. The flames will erase all their memories of the house and its secrets, leaving behind just their ambitions and preferences. In reality, Arlecchino has been secretly doing this ever since she became the knave 5 years ago. And she also made an agreement with Neuvillette not to legally pursue those children for the crimes they committed but they can't even remember anymore. In the end, Arlecchino set Khaenri'ah free from the House of the Hearth, finally fulfilling the dream that she couldn't fulfill when she was alive. About the quest, I have just a few considerations. I was actually right about her, despite having been called a pure-hearted, naive soul that couldn't see how evil she was. Yes, she's ruthless against her enemies, but she will never do anything to hurt her children, and she even agreed to work with Dottore, someone she despises, to find a way out of the orphanage for those who wanted a normal life. Despite her violent training sessions and her attempts at being a strict and unfeeling father, she's probably one of the most loving parents we've seen so far. I was also right that the fight against her was all about determining if the children were more loyal to the family rather than her, which is what she actually wanted, so her disappointment was just an act to test them. The Scattered Ruins is the place where Peruer defeated both Khaenri'ah and Crusabina, which doesn't make sense at first glance. I mean, we saw that the place was in ruins when she fought against Khaenri'ah, but it was a building when she fought Crusabina, so I guess the place was simply rebuilt in the year that it took Arlecchino to train herself, only for her to destroy it all over again. The stone where we can start the weekly challenge is also the tombstone Arlecchino made for Crusabina, and it reads, "Here lies Harbinger Crusabina, to enter the fading lambency of the dusk, to ensure the ascending radiance of the dusk." Which feels like she's saying, yeah, I made sure she's dead. Something that you might have noticed that almost doesn't make sense is her vision. We know, and this seems to be a certainty at this point, that when a person receives a vision, the inlay will represent the nation in which they received it. The easiest example is always Toma, who is from Mondstadt but received an Inazuman vision because he was living in that nation when he got it. We learn from Arlecchino's character stories that she received her vision in the time between Khaenri'ah's death and her fight against Krusabina. Considering that the children weren't allowed to leave the orphanage back then, why did she receive a Snezhnayan vision instead of a Fontanian one? Well, considering that Freminet was brought to the House of the Hearth after Khaenri'ah's death, but still under the direction of Krusabina, but also never met Peruer, if not after she became the Knave, it would simply mean that she spent the year-long training to defeat Krusabina in Snezhnaya, during which she received and mastered her vision. She was a very special child of the House of the Hearth. She was favored by Krusabina and probably even by Dottore, considering her circumstances, and she had just become the king, so it makes sense that she was allowed to go to Snezhnaya for training. By the way, if we consider that Khaenri'ah and Peruer were peers and that Khaenri'ah died when she was 16, if we add 1 year of training and 5 years of being the director, Arlecchino should just be 22 years old. I really enjoyed Child's interaction with Arlecchino because they looked like the typical gossipy neighbors that usually trash talk each other behind their backs, but when they're together, they join forces to trash talk someone they both hate. I also liked Arlecchino's voiceover about Signora, even though it was kinda sad. Signora seemed to be like a doting aunt to the children and a little childish herself, so I wonder what kind of mother she would have become if the cataclysm didn't take Rossam's life. Arlecchino and Signora probably got close because they both had fire running through their veins, which may be the reason why Arlecchino is basically the only person who was truly sad about her passing and didn't see her as just a tool in Piero's hands to complete their mission. Lastly, something that I'm really disappointed with is the complete absence of an explanation or even just a hint at what her glitch in animation means, especially since it's one of her idle animations, but it also happens after she ults. The closest explanation we could find may be the after images of the people she defeated with her flames, since they can manifest as dazzling colors, which should be those weird things floating around Arlecchino before we challenge her. Another potential explanation may be found in a fading candle she drops in the boss fight, since we could say that she flickers like the flame of a candle. Or maybe it has to do with the declaration and rejection that the image in her eyes represents, as it is said in the other drop, Denial and Judgment. Okay, with the story quest out of the way, it's time to talk about Arlecchino's curse and origins, the real main topics of this video. Arlecchino is the descendant of the Crimson Moon dynasty of Khaenri'ah. Piero told her that the secrets from before her birth can be found in the book Hierobranto Innamorato, so Perineri, because although the circumstances described in the book are fictitious, the key details are accurate. Considering that Perineri came from beyond Khaenri'ah and didn't belong to any nation, Arlecchino's ancestors may very well be Hleobrand and Angelica, who escaped from Khaenri'ah. Now, we don't know precisely how the Crimson Moon dynasty ended, but considering how surprised Piero was to find out that a descendant still existed, it would make sense to believe that they either died because of some experiment in alchemy, which was their main focus, or that they did something for which they were persecuted and probably even executed. Something else we learned is that Piero probably created the House of the Hearth to mirror the orphanage that existed back in Khaenri'ah, but above all, that the Khaenri'ah orphanage was created and directed by the members of the Crimson Moon dynasty. As for the curse she bears, there are multiple options we can explore. Arlecchino defines it as some hereditary curse, and Piero told her that it stems from her bloodline as a descendant of the Crimson Moon dynasty. Ever since she was a child, she had to be very careful of her powers because if she lost focus, the curse would go berserk, eating away at her body. As we saw in the song Burning in Embers, it started with the tips of her fingers when she still couldn't control it perfectly, and it ended up spreading to her elbows when she intentionally let it grow to harvest its power. The black skin is almost as if the curse burned her like wood, turning her skin into charcoal, or we can say that it's slowly corroding her. Arlecchino actually fears this power because she's afraid she would undergo some kind of change or transformation if it ever reached her heart. And lastly, we learned that, thanks to Dottore, she was able to extract the flames that run through her blood, and their main property is to erase memories. Now, my theory is very simple. The Crimson Moon dynasty focused on alchemy, and from what we read in Perineri, it seems that Rein's daughter was one of the alchemists of that dynasty, because the nobles were supported by the Beastmasters who commanded the Dark Sprites, that is the Rift Wolves that we know Rein's daughter created. Her name alone is enough to think that some failed unethical alchemical experiment could be the cause of Balemoon Curse, but also the end of the Crimson Moon dynasty, with most likely the death of its members. The description of Arlecchino's signature weapon though, Crimson Moon Semblance, tells us that the dynasty was ruled by a confused king, and that he was convinced by the dogmatic priests that the remnants of the Crimson Moon in the sky ruled all, and that the Abyss would have eventually emerged from it as well. Hence, the king believed that he should have used the light and flame of two worlds to judge fate. The members of the dynasty began looking for transcendent beings, built glorious towers for them, and prayed to the dead Crimson Moon so that it would deliver salvation. But everything changed when the astrologists were branded as heretics because they managed to look through the inverted image of the false sky and saw the origin of the whole world's fate. Doubt and fury began to spread across the kingdom until it reached the Crimson Palace, where, I guess, the king ruled over Khaenri'ah. By the time the Eclipse dynasty took over, the name of the Crimson Moon dynasty had already disappeared, together with the blood they spilled. What was left at that time was only the word Balemoon, and it was used as an insult. Some of the members of the Crimson Moon dynasty did survive. Some had been cursed by what destroyed their kingdom, while others weren't, but none of them ever dared say that they belonged to that dynasty. They all hid in the shadows, hoping that the Crimson Moon would someday avenge them, but in the end there was no vengeance for them, and the Eclipse dynasty made the same kind of mistake and were destroyed as well. So a short version of the description would be that the Crimson Moon dynasty believed that the Red Dead Moon granted them the power to defy fate. They looked for transcendent people to reach this goal, the astrologists managed to see what's beyond the false sky, and that brought about the destruction of the kingdom, and even cursed some of its members. The Eclipse dynasty took over, but they basically did the same thing and history repeated itself. Now, the two main and interesting aspects we will analyze are the inverted image of the false sky and the two destructions of Khaenri'ah. Before we can talk about the first aspect, I need to digress a little bit, or better yet, I need to ramble for a few minutes to make everything clearer later, and to do so, we first need to talk about the Microcosm of Teyvat. I've always believed that the Microcosm of Teyvat was a sphere with a flat plane in the middle. The inhabitable Teyvat is in the lower side of the world, while the Abyss is on the upper side. Now, I always ended up confusing myself whenever I try to think about this, and that's because I probably never actually understood what my brain was trying to tell me. If the unnamed city in the chasm was once in the right direction, it means that the unified nation was originally built in the lower section of Teyvat, the one that is facing the old world below, probably to siphon its powers, also considering that both the Spiral Abyss and Irminsul would have originally pointed in the same direction. This would also explain why the primordial humans received everything they wanted from the sky. The primordial one was basically taking things from the old world and giving them to Teyvat through the gate in the sky. Then, as we said, because of the second who came, the world was almost destroyed and ended up upside down. If we consider the Abyss to be something like a liquid, then the Abyss remained in the upper section. Some pieces of the unified nation, like Enkanomiya and most likely Khaenri'ah as well, detached from the ground and ended up in domains, something like bubbles floating in the abyss, so they flipped together with the world, retaining the right direction. In the case of the unnamed city, instead, it simply sank into the ground and got lodged, so it couldn't flip, and it's now upside down from our perspective. Anyway, what I mean to say is that there is a very similar concept in Honkai Star Rail that deserves to be analyzed. We were told that in an unspecified past, there were two worlds, Izumo, which is Acheron planet, and Takamagahara, that revolved around the pitch-black Great Sun. At first glance, it sounds like a binary system, with two sister planets orbiting a black hole, IX, the Nihility. But if we look at the image of the planar ornament set, Izumo Gensei and Takama Divine Realm, It's actually a single sphere split into two hemispheres. Above is Takamagahara, the land of the Kami, and below is Izumo, the land of the humans, and in the history, the Kami descended into the land of the humans. This is very similar to Genshin Impact. Khaenri'ah believed that the gods came from the sea, and just like the Kami, it means that they came from the other half of the planet. And the placement of the two words in Star Rail is actually the same as the ones in Genshin Impact. The humans are in the lower section, while the gods are in the upper one, although in Genshin Impact, the Heavenly Principles and the Sustainer reside above the Microcosm in the heavens that the Primordial One created, where there's the mysterious doorway we use to get inside Teyvat every time we open the game, the same door Aether and Lumine use when they arrive for the first time. They traversed the abyss and stopped at the first inhabitable zone they found, Khaenri'ah, because it was underground. This is also the reason why Aether has memories of the abyss. The twins traversed it back to flee from Teyvat, but when they got out of that doorway, they met Sasti and were sent back inside. To conclude this rambling, when we read both in Perineri and in the Crimson Moon Semblance that there were transcendent people that traversed the fire of two worlds within the hearth, it can actually mean that these people, Perineri included, were people who lived in the other half of the macrocosm, who descended into the lower hemisphere and ended up in Khaenri'ah, where they were treated like gods. For them, the Khaenri'ahs built glorious towers, which could be the 4 pillars we read about in the Girdle of the Sands, so it seems that they were able to use forbidden knowledge. So here's the unanswerable questions. Are some people being born in the Abyss? Are these people from the Unified Nation? Is this what Khaenri'ah was trying to control in the Abyss? And are the two words that the Crimson Moon Dynasty talked about simply Teyvat and the Abyss, just like Izumo and Takamagahara in Star Rail? Okay, now that I'm done rambling, we can talk about the inverted image of the sky. The members of the Crimson Moon Dynasty specialized in alchemy, and it is clear that they were studying the Abyss considering Reindaughter and the Rift Wolves. What's particularly fascinating is the fact that the astrologists were able to see the origins of the whole world's fate through this inverted image of the false sky. I have 4 theories that may explain what it is. Option 1. If the false sky is inverted, it could mean that instead of being the actual sky, it's what's opposite to it, something on the ground or underground. So, as it could have been hinted at in Perineri, it's the ocean, the space projected by the stars. If so, I could think that this inverted sky or ocean is the surface of the Abyss, and considering that Khaenri'ah was an underground nation, it makes sense that they were closer to the Abyss rather than the sky. As we said in the digression, the world is upside down, it's inverted, and what they saw beyond it could have been the Primordial Unified Nation, the origin of the world's fate. We all know what happens if someone finds out about the Unified Nation and the Primordial One, Orobashi is proof enough. Option 2. This is something we actually witnessed with our own eyes. If we enter the apocalyptic world in Renee's book, we find something like a mirror, and beyond it there's the fountain in the upside down city in the chasm. But what's important is that the image we see is from before the events from Requiem of the Echoing Depths, so it's an image of the past. The Crimson Moon Dynasty could have attempted something similar and saw the distant past, which would have shown them the Unified Nation because, as Denslev said, Khaenri'ah's architectural style is the same as the upside down city in the chasm, so Khaenri'ah was built on the ruins of the Unified Nation. Considering that the realm inside Renee's book showed the future, the fate of the world, albeit a wrong one, the inverted image in the mirror in the realm that the Khaenri'ah might have created could have shown them the past, the origin of the world's fate. Option 3. They were studying the sky we see in the game, the false sky, and they managed to see beyond that. Since the humans live in the lower hemisphere, what they saw on the other side was probably the old world, from which Teyvat was created. Everything we know about the old world was mirrored inside Teyvat: 7 nations, 7 dragons, 7 elements, and so on. This could also explain why Piero knows about the old world despite the fact that Khaenri'ah had never been able to steal the book before Sun and Moon. This option though feels wrong because it would mean that they left Khaenri'ah to perform their experiments while this first but smaller cataclysm still happened inside the nation. Option 4. The Khaenri'ahs could have seen what's beyond the doorway at the bottom of the abyss. What stands out is the choice of words. The people glimpsed at the origins of the word's fate, while during the Eclipse Dynasty they spied at the secrets beyond the sky. This could make me think that the Crimson Moon Dynasty managed to slightly open the doorway, glimpsed at the heavens where the heavenly principles reside, so the origin of the word's fate. They tried to reproduce what they saw through alchemy, but things went wrong and they ended up cursing themselves. Well, thousands of years later, Nabu Malikata sacrificed herself and became the key to open the door wide, so the Eclipse Dynasty could easily spy the secrets from beyond it, acquire forbidden knowledge, summon the travelers, and as a consequence the punishment was far greater. Of the 4 options, this one is what makes most sense to me. If this is the case, then there is a huge difference between the Balemoon Curse and the Cataclysm Curse. The first one was self-inflicted, while the second one was an attempt by the Heavenly Principles to prevent the world from being destroyed. If the Brimstone. If the Crimson Moon Dynasty attempted to reproduce the heavenly powers through alchemy and the result was fire flowing through their veins, then I could think that they tried to use something that was as close as possible to the highest powers of Teyvat. And since we're getting closer to Natlan, then I'll propose the Primal Fire, or as it is called in the Unfinished Reverie, the sacred flames where the dead are believed to go back to. This would easily fit with Arlecchino's powers being connected to fire and to death, and it would also link the Red Moon with probably one of the 3 Moirai sisters, the personifications of destiny that spun fate like a thread from a spindle. In this case, I'd say that the Red Moon may be Atropos, the inevitable, so the one that cuts the thread, representing death, but I'll probably talk about the 3 Moon sisters in the video about Remuria. Anyway, in all 4 options, the Crimson Moon Dynasty figured out something they weren't supposed to learn and were punished for it, which takes me to the last interesting aspect of the Crimson Moon Semblance description: the 2 Destructions of Khaenri'ah. In both cases, Khaenri'ah was wiped out and the people were cursed, but this can also mean that, just like the first time, not everyone was cursed and the kingdom was indeed rebuilt, so there's probably a cycle in Khaenri'ah as well, the fate they wanted to defy perhaps. There are 3 instances that make me think that this is an actual possibility. First of all, in the Travail video, Dainslev said that,
"But in the hidden corners where the god's gaze does not fall, there are those who dream of dreaming."
So there seems to actually be someone down there, and the fact that they don't or can't dream is something we read also in the description of the Crimson Moon Semblance. The unquenchable flames of doubt and fury blazed across the dreamless realm. The second case is what's written in the ancient journal we found in the Gavire Lajavad area, in which the writer said that some people, him included, stayed in Khaenri'ah with their families, while others who fled to the surface decided to go back after witnessing other citizens transforming into monsters. Lastly, and this has always bothered me by the way, after Halfdan disappeared in Requiem of the Echoing Depths, Dainslev murmured to himself,
"No need to revive the homeland."
Dainslev didn't say those words to comfort Halfdan because he had already disappeared first of all, and he had just told him that Khaenri'ah was still standing, so from Halfdan's perspective, everything is just fine. Dainslev was, most likely, pondering on what the Abyss Order is trying to do, which is indeed trying to revive Khaenri'ah. This would mean that despite the destruction of the nation, it had already been rebuilt by those who hadn't been cursed by the Cataclysm, just like it happened after the fall of the Crimson Moon Dynasty. Now, going back to Arlecchino, I believe that her curse has 2 layers. One is the Balemoon Bloodfire that we just talked about, while the second has to do with the other property of a Bloodfire, erasing memories. So once again, my theory here is pretty easy. Arlecchino is a descendant of the Crimson Moon Dynasty, who were the noble bloodline that ruled over Khaenri'ah, but this is indeed a huge problem. Once again, during the Requiem of Echoing Depths, Dainslev said that when it comes to how the curse was laid,
"The only identity that mattered was being from Khaenri'ah."
It is virtually impossible, or at least it is to me, that every single person who was born or moved to Khaenri'ah was present that same day when the cataclysm happened and the nation was destroyed. Also because we know that some Khaenri'ahs used to be sent on missions outside of the nation. There must have been someone who wasn't there when it all happened, but we've also never heard of a survivor of the cataclysm who then settled down and lived happily ever after. So what Dainslev said makes me think that anyone who identified with Khaenri'ah was cursed, no matter where they were in all of Teyvat. Now, if Piero told Arlecchino to read Perineri to understand her origins, my guess, as I said before, is that Hleobrand and Angelica should be her ancestors. Hleobrand was probably a non-cursed descendant of the Crimson Moon dynasty, while Angelica was from Liyue, and from generation to generation the Crimson Moon blood got thinner and thinner, so the new descendants became increasingly less Khaenri'ah. When the cataclysm happened though, these people were probably affected by the curse as well, but in such a small dose that they probably didn't even notice. That is until Perwer was born, displaying a strong Crimson Moon blood. If I have to guess, it could simply be that after thousands of years and countless generations since Hleobrand and Angelica, two of their distant descendants got together by a twist of fate, and because of their shared ancestry, Perwer was born with the curse. It's basically like two unknowing asymptomatic carriers getting together and having a child that displays the disease, which ties back to Arlecchino calling her blood fire a hereditary curse. You might be asking, why are you talking about the curse of the cataclysm? Well, you see, after Cloud Retainer told Yuandai that if she didn't revert back to a crane, she would have lost all of her memories and it would have turned her into a monster, I got the confirmation I was waiting for. The curse of the cataclysm simply erases the memories of the Khaenri'ahs to either prevent them to go back to the Leylands and corrupt Irminsul, or to prevent their knowledge to be reused by Irminsul in the future so that no one would do the same things. And the consequence of losing one's memories is to turn into a monster. Both Dainslev and Arlecchino define their curse as something slowly creeping up from the inside, something that would take over if they didn't constantly keep it in check, something that would transform them into monsters if they let go. Plus, Dainslev is slowly forgetting things, while Arlecchino can use her blood fire to erase people's memories. In short, I believe that the second layer of Arlecchino's curse is the ability to wield the power of erosion itself, which is the power of the curse of the cataclysm. If I'm right, then she is also, in a weird way, affected by the curse of the wilderness, meaning that if she ever let go, she would probably turn into a pyro-hilitary rogue, and this would finally explain why her eyes and arms are similar to caterpillars, even if their origin story is completely different. Now, to conclude this video, there really is only one other question that remains about Arlecchino. Where was she born? She makes people believe that she was born in Fontaine, but in 4.6 she told us that it is a lie that she uses to hide the truth, and we can clearly see that she's not Fontainian because she can cause numeracy annihilation with her attacks, and she can jump like a dolphin in the water, two innate characteristics of Fontainian born people. Of course, there is literally nothing that even remotely hints at her place of birth anywhere, so I can only think of two possibilities. The first one is Khaenri'ah, and this is the reason why I talked about it for so long earlier in the video. If there are regular non-cursed people still living in the underground nation who rebuilt it, then there is a chance that her ancestors eventually came back to Khaenri'ah after its destruction and settled down there. The only problem I have with this theory is that she was found abandoned and she was brought to the House of the Hearth. I highly doubt that the Fatui got inside the underground nation and, of all things, they brought back a child. There is a chance though that her parents decided to abandon her on the surface when they realized that she was displaying the Balemoon Bloodfire curse, because as we said before, the Crimson Moon descendants have a bad reputation in Khaenri'ah, and Balemoon is basically an insult used against them. The other possibility is Natlan, both because I'm hoping I was at least a little bit right about her in my Fatui Harbinger video from a year ago, and because we're probably not getting 4.8, so they really need to start giving hints about Natlan. As I said before, the Crimson Moon dynasty may have used the sacred fire from Natlan in their heretical experiments that caused them to be cursed, and from what we can understand of it, it's probably the Natlan version of the Primordial Sea, a primordial source of power that was used in the creation of Teyvat. In Natlan's case, it has to do with fire for obvious reasons, and it seems to be related to death and the underworld, two very important aspects of the Mesoamerican ancient cultures on which Natlan is based. Considering that Hildebrand and Angelica, Arlecchino's potential ancestors, fled from Khaenri'ah, of which the gates are beneath the Girdle of the Sands, they had to choose where to go. Angelica originally fled from Liyue because she didn't want to recognize Rex Lapis as her new god, so she wouldn't go back there, and as a consequence they couldn't have crossed it to reach Mondstadt. There's a chance that Rukkhadevata hadn't created the rainforest yet, because we don't really know when during the Archon War their story took place, so Sumeru was literally just a huge inhospitable desert. Going to Fontaine wouldn't really mean fleeing very far, Inazuma is too far in the ocean, Snezhnaya is too far on the other side and it's completely frozen to the point that if you don't keep moving you'll freeze as well, so why would anyone want to go there, so the last nation would have been Natlan. If Arlecchino was abandoned there, it would have been easier to find and be brought to the House of the Hearth. Of course, we don't really have proof of this, not even her white hair is proof enough. It is indeed similar to Bennett and Ian's sons, but Ito has the same shade of white and is definitely not from Natlan. As for my old video on the Harbingers and the Commedia dell'arte, back then I theorized that Arlecchino was from Natlan, that her constellation was the Healing Hand, and as a consequence she would have been a Hydro Healer. Of course, the constellation and the element were completely wrong, but you know, apart from the possibility that she was actually born in Natlan, there actually is healing in her kit, it's just that she only heals herself. And that's it, I hope you liked the video. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, and if you're interested in Genshin Impact theory videos, consider subscribing. I won't say too much in the outro because the video was long enough already. I'll start working on the next 4.6 analysis video, so Remuria, and in the meantime I'm still finishing the Star Rail related secret project I've talked about in the community tab. I don't know if I'll make a video about the events, it depends on what they talk about, but I'm definitely making yet another Natlan video when the Saurian quest happens, since the guy has info on Natlan, and I'll also talk about the Unfinished Reverie artifact set. Of course, I'll make a video about Cyno's story quest when phase 2 begins. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, over and out.